All right, guys, we are back with another Seeing Through Gebser video today. Thank you guys so much for continuing to watch. Now, last week we covered a very, very, very brief history of the fourth dimension, so the different interpretations from different thinkers of the fourth dimension. Now, in this video, we are going to be examining how this understanding of fourth dimension by each of these different thinkers was applied. And once it was applied, the results of the application. Now, if you remember in last week's video, Gebser he wasn't harsh about it, but he was critical of this understanding of four-dimensional time. He thought pretty much all the people we talked about last week, Mach, Zollner, even Einstein to a large extent, have gotten it wrong. So we're going to be going through that today. And I have to say, we're going to be getting into some pretty cool stuff in this video, so I'm excited to get into it. Also, RIP to all of you who thought I wouldn't get you 2 Gebser videos in a week. Huh? That's what I thought. You guys doubted me. You doubted me. You're like my girlfriend, my mother, anyone who's dependent upon me, and anyone who claims to love me. You doubted me, and unlike them, you were wrong. So, we're going to pick it up where we left off. Also, very odd situation where it seems my last Gebser video got over like 250 views, which to me might as well be the entire population of China. And I have no idea. I mean, I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Why you would ever watch part 41 in a series of a person you don't know is beyond me, but I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Please continue to hang around. I love you guys. I'm just very interested on what that was about. I almost feel like I was being helped by the algorithm a little bit. So, all right, without all that, let's get into it because we have a lot to cover today. There's going to be some really great stuff in this video today. So, let's get into it. Quote, "As we have seen in part 1 of our exposition, Petrarch's discovery of landscape was the potential discovery of space. Together with the brothers Lorenzetti, Giotto, and the Sufi miniaturist, he makes visible the possibility of space." Why he put that in quotes, I don't know. But the precise realization of the dimensions of space did not come about for another 150 years until Leonardo achieved the realization of space disclosing perspective toward the close of the 15th century. So back when we talked earlier in the series about Petrarch's great discovery of perspective when he stood on top of Mount Ventoux, that is nice and that's great, and you were the first one to have this sort of intimate awareness of what space is, and in many ways you are kind of the one who discovered it. Nonetheless, you are not the one who came up with discovered the vanishing point and did all the great stuff that Da Vinci did. And of course, Da Vinci wouldn't have been able to do it without the brothers Lorenzetti, Giotto, and all the other guys. So the point he's trying to make, and the point we're going to make and connect it to time, is that when you first discover this new structure, this new dimension, that's probably a better way of putting it, you don't necessarily have perfect access to what it is. You still have to, as we're about to outline, go through this process of concretization. There is a reason Da Vinci was the one who really got the ball rolling on perspectivity and really kind of apotheosized it, and not Petrarch. It takes time. These are difficult things to adapt to. Okay. We might, however, say that space, and this includes perspective and the third dimension, is already present in the manifestations by the four in an imaginary way, to use a common if not entirely apt expression. Those loci, of which Petrarch speaks in his letter, are already space, whose manifold perspectivization is coalesced into precisely this space. Those loci are perhaps best described as imaginary three-dimensional space. Or in other words, Petrarch's landscape with its loci is the imaginary space that becomes an objectively real space only when Leonardo's theory of perspectivity and its application removed it from the realm of the imaginary. So it stops becoming a purely theoretical thing and becomes concretized, which is to say, it almost gets subsumed into the natural workings of all of your faculties, of your consciousness, where it becomes automatic. Think of the dumbest person you know. Even that person has a very baseline automatic understanding of rationality in space, right? If you give that box to him and say, put it behind the fire extinguisher, they'll, assuming they're being honest, they'll do it. If you say something like, I don't know, you just give some very, very, very basic logic, right? You just kind of the parts less than the whole. They will get it, even if they're kind of dumb. That's the point, is that the dimension of space has been concretized, and that's what we need to do with time. We do not know if Gauss spoke of the probable form of the continuum that bears and affects the quote-unquote non-Euclidean geometry, which he discovered and named. Nor do we know if he defined it as an imaginary sphere. We do know that F.H. Lambert, extending the work of Jesuit scholar G. Saccheri, spoke of an imaginary sphere which necessarily forms the basis of a geometry constructed without the unprovable parallel postulate. Saccher's work, Euclid Free of All Blemishes, I think, was published in 1733. We are here interested in the fact that the notion of an imaginary sphere is inextricably linked to the supersession of the Euclidean conception of space in the same way as the notion of Petrarch's imaginary space cited earlier was linked to the supersession of a merely two-dimensional world. So, of course, we remember Euclid's postulates, these sort of very basic geometric axioms. We're transcending that with non-Euclidean geometry. We covered this last week. As Petrarch's imaginary space became an objectively real space of 3 dimensions in the course of about 5 generations, listen to this, so did the imaginary sphere become the objectively real known sphere of 4 dimension, the curved space of physics, via Einstein's theory of relativity approximately 5 generations after Lambert. So I think what he's getting at here is a lot of the problems that we're seeing nowadays is because time as an intensity is becoming concretized, but unfortunately it's doing so in a way that we're simply just not consciously aware of it. And it's always messy when that happens. Very interesting parallel, by the way. It took 5 decades for the imaginary space to become real space, which is to say when that dimension became concretized in our consciousness. It also took 5 decades, or 5 generations, I should say, after that with time, too. So, interesting. Atheists, don't bother. You don't belong here. It's a coincidence. Shut up. Morons. It is also important that we not overlook that the intermediate links between Lambert or Gauss and Einstein are as significant as those between Petrarch and Leonardo da Vinci, which we noted in our discussion of the history of perspective. That discussion might well have been entitled The History of the Third Dimension. As to the history of the fourth dimension, we would note that Riemann's discovery of the second type of non-Euclidean geometry laid the foundations for Einstein's application of the fourth dimension in physics, along with the work of Beltrami and F. Klein, who were responsible for the ultimate and decisive demonstration of the, quote, objective character of the negatively constant curved surface, i.e., the presumably imaginary sphere, unquote, during the years 1869 to 1871. Here we can only allude to the decisive contributions made by Minkowski's geometry of numbers to Einstein's theory, to the special relativity theory as a geometry in 4-dimensional space, and to Lorentz's quote-unquote transformation, where various 4-dimensional coordinate systems relative to one another can be bilaterally converted, inasmuch as a discussion of these developments would lead us too far afield. So it's not that Gebser is punting these. He's just recognizing we have a limited space here, we have limited time, we can't go into detail into everything, but the intermediary links between Petrarch and Da Vinci, between Einstein and Gauss, or Gauss and Einstein, we'll say. Very important. Don't think Gebser doesn't know his stuff. He does. He just knows what's relevant. It's kind of like a film director. In the remarks above, we have examined the first item pressing for consideration in our brief outline of a history of the fourth dimension, namely, the unusual simultaneity of discovery of non-Euclidean geometry, which is the very foundation of a conception of n-dimensional, and thus four-dimensional, spaces. With respect to this simultaneity, it is of interest to note that it is an instance not of a double discovery, which is often met up with, but a quadruple discovery. Working simultaneously but independently in different countries, 4 men unearthed the basis for a new conception of the world and consequently of a new consciousness structure. It may not be amiss to suggest that there is a justification for the conclusion that the original consciousness has thereby sought to ensure the human accomplishment of such a decisive step in the emergence of consciousness. So what he's saying is that it almost sounds like Foucault and his epistemes, that a particular individual is it's not relevant here. We shouldn't be giving credit to one particular guy. If we're being integral, then we're integrating all, which presupposes that it's not just one, so it kind of makes sense that 4 different people would create their own things. Remember, we're trying to transcend the individualist ego. Interesting, huh? And it also kind of aligns with what I was talking about with Dostoevsky and Raskolnikov's real crime against killing that clerk or whatever it was. She was a miserable, awful, just bitter woman who made the lives of everyone she touched worse. So what's the problem with killing her? I mean, it'd be a net benefit to society, right? Well, the problem, yeah, you might think that. And Raskolnikov did, and look what happened. His guilt ate him so much to the point where he almost voluntarily walked into a gulag just so he can alleviate of it. Why? Because he has not sinned against a particular person. If you were sinning against a particular person, then yeah, we'd be able to bring in all these personal character traits and attributes. But you are not. You are sinning against man. You have sinned against man. Not a man, man. It is above it, and it is apersonal, and you messed up. And I think that's a connection here. Maybe I'm wrong. Quote, we are aware that such an interpretation will offend adherents of the anthropocentric attitude prevalent today, and yet it must be recognized that we are not by any means propounding a conviction that rests only on belief of some divine governance of affairs. Let us merely be content to consider this mutation of consciousness, like those preceding it, as being latent in our endowment, necessarily breaking forth at an organically determined moment and manifesting itself in accord with its intensity and transformative energy in a way that cannot be and is not being ignored or overlooked. So essentially saying, if you want to say this coincidence isn't a product of some sort of spiritual divinity, fine. I'll just do this sort of base evolution argument, and I'm still going to beat your ass. That's the great thing about Gebser. He doesn't. He covers all bases. He recognizes what's going to come up against him, and he's just like, all right, let's knock this out of the way before it becomes a problem. As to one fundamental conclusion resulting from these deliberations, there can be no doubt. The discovery of landscape by Petrarch and his contemporaries can be placed in relation, indeed parallel, to the discovery of non-Euclidean geometry by Gauss and his contemporaries. The conception of landscape contains, at first imaginarily, the germ or prefiguration of three-dimensional, perspectively fixed space, which is only later realized. So that's really what he was talking about with this imaginary space. It's almost potential space that we can glimpse, and through the process of concretization becomes real, just as real as rationality is to every single, even the dumb ones. The concept of landscapes contains, and the concept of a non-Euclidean geometry, in turn, is an anticipation, again imaginarily, of the later realized sphere, which is non-fixed, four-dimensional, and free of perspective, i.e. aperspectival, because it is a moving as well as transparent sphere. Now, it's funny. I was going to get this video to you guys last night, but I really wanted to make I made a couple qualitative breakthroughs, I think, which is good from the past 2 or 3 weeks. And one of them, I think, is the sphere. So hopefully you guys approve of my explanation. But the sphere is very, 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 very important. Okay, it is the symbol of integral consciousness. We're going to get into why in the next couple paragraphs. Of course, the symbol for the magic was the dot, or the point, a point like unity. That's one-dimensional. Of course, the mythical, it's 2D flat circle. Mental, it's the 3D triangle. And then, of course, the sphere will be a 4D sphere. We'll get into that. In part 1 of our discussion, we pointed out that the sphere is the quote-unquote symbol of the four-dimensional integral consciousness structure. The concept of an imaginary sphere, which emerged precisely when the realization of a non-Euclidean geometry proved inescapable, surely indicates the validity of this symbol for the aperspectival world. It is of particular significance that we have also encountered the parallelism of the forms of expression and dimension of both structures in connection with their simultaneous discovery. The significance derives from the fact that the four-dimensional sphere, or in geometric terms, space curved by time, is the only real basis for actualizing a four-dimensional system of coordinates. The simple sphere is merely three-dimensional. Only the moving, transparent sphere is four-dimensional, and only the transparency guarantees the aperspectival perception. So, important. When you look at a 3D sphere, what you see is the surface of the object, and that was all you will see. What is contained within inside that surface is invisible and is viewed as emptiness. It is space. It is without content. It is without material. So that's the difference between a 3D sphere. So we have the three-dimensional sphere that only shows you the surface of the object, the outer surface, and can't tell you what's inside the sphere. Switch to a four-dimensional sphere, and it is the exact opposite. It continues to give you the outer surface of three-dimensionality, but it also shows you what is inside. It reveals the content within that sphere. So, do I want to say it now? It's transparent. That's the point. A 3D sphere, and you want to look it up. I'm about to go tell you to look it up in a second. A 3D sphere only shows you the outside, whereas the 4D shows you the outside and inside. And another big difference is that the 3D sphere is static. In accordance, of course, with the mental structure and perspectivity, it is static, where the 4D sphere is constantly moving. So it's transparent and constantly moving. That is the difference between the 4D sphere, which is the symbol, not the 3D sphere, the 4D sphere, and the 3D sphere. So very important to know that. This four-dimensionality of the transparent spherical surface will consequently be of decisive value to the four-dimensional character of, say, recent paintings. Such paintings will lose the obtruseness which it still has for many people today when certain of its examples are no longer viewed with the eyes of a three-dimensional consciousness. What must frequently seem to be distorted to the three-dimensional manner of viewing is resolved into a new form of harmony. We are speaking here of only the best works of recent painting. So Picasso, essentially. When the observer is able to perceive that this form of art is based neither on simple surface nor on the abstract space which this surface conjures up before us in perspectivation, but rather on the moving and simultaneously transparent spherical surface. I almost feel like this I almost feel like this paragraph is in here because he's a snob. He's a you know, I love Gebser to death, but let's call a spade a spade. He's a snob. So I can imagine him looking at a painting and being like, wow, this Picasso is really great. And some rationalist is like, it doesn't even look good. It's not perspectively correct. And him just getting frustrated. This is very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link to a picture visualizing the differences between a 3D sphere and a 4D sphere. These are very, 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 very important. And after this next paragraph, I'm going to explain the direct connections between 3D and 4D sphere. So, like I said earlier, the 4D sphere, not only is it transparent insofar as it shows you the outer and the inner, and not only is it constantly moving, but there's a third aspect here. The outer and the inner are connected, and what you're going to see with that picture, you're going to pause the video, and you're going to go down to the description, and you're going to click on that link, and you are going to visualize, or if you want to just throw it on Google, whatever, you're going to see all these points that are connected by bars that connect the external and the internal, almost as if they're integrating. Oh, that's interesting. And you won't see that in the 3D, so very important. You have to look at this. Just pause the video and go look, or just go on Google. Very important. The conception of the imaginary sphere, which is in no way merely fortuitous, is of constitutive import and value for the a-perspectival world. As we shall see, it became genuine or pivotal not only in the geometry of Beltrami and Klein and in the modified form of physics in Einstein's theory of relativity, but has also begun to alter fundamentally the basis of other areas of human expression and activity. The preconditions necessary for this are for the most part already completed, with one decisive exception. And this exception we shall have to consider as soon as we come to the second consideration, which arose in our brief outline of the history of the fourth dimension. The adaptation of the concept of a fourth dimension by representatives of the most widely disparate disciplines. So, before we get into this, let me try to explain almost on a psychological level, the fact that the consciousness is a four-dimensional sphere rather than a 3D sphere. So let's say, like I did this morning, I woke up and I'm in a good mood. Let's say my girlfriend brings me breakfast in bed and it just puts me in a good mood. Great. So I get up, I eat my breakfast, and I think, well, like normally, I have to go run because I eat like crap and I have to compensate. So I'm in a good mood and I'm on my run. I immediately go outside and I start walking down to my little running path. And when I look around, I see trees, I see the sunlight, I see the sky, I see little squirrels, I see some deer running, I see the road, I see trash cans, I see large fields and sort of plains of corn, and I see my neighbors, and I see that they're farming, right? So single thing that I just mentioned is an external point, okay? Think of it a point, but just a bunch of points, okay? But then I also have all these other things that are internal, right? So things like appreciation, annoyance, irritation, frustration, joy, pleasure, elation. stuff like that. So we have all these external points that I just talked about. We have all these internal points. That's very interesting. Okay, so why is the 4D sphere better than the 3D sphere? Well, if you just go look at that picture that I left in the description, which you should have done, you will see that these points, external and internal, are connected by bars, which means they are integrated, and the bars are time. That is what time is. The bars that connect spatial, the external to the internal, is time. So I'm in a good mood, and I see all these things, right? So all these points are being connected by bars. All these external points, I should say, are being connected by bars to my internal state. Because I'm in a good mood, because my temporal unfolding matches the temporal unfolding of the external world, these points are connected to positive internal points, right? So my run, I had a great time. Why? I appreciated the weather. I appreciated the climate. I appreciated the fact that I had time and space to do this. All these aspects were integrated with the external, and it generates a quality that charges my run, and that would be just kind of this sort of placid enjoyment. I mean, I am physically exercising, so it's not always fun, but you see what I mean. So let's say this exact same thing happens, right? This exact same thing happens. So I'm on my run, everything's going great. The integration between the external points and the internal points by time as an intensity, which are those bars that connect. I'm running, and then I see, oh no. I mean, this didn't happen to me in real life, so don't get it twisted. But let's say I had an ex-girlfriend, and she cheated on me with some guy. That didn't happen in real life. Let's say it did. And I'm walking on my run, and boom, there's Jerry, and I see him. He appears suddenly, instantaneously. That, my friend, now Jerry, that point, is going to be connected to other internal aspects like fear, anger, annoyance, irritation. That one thing can completely rearrange the bars that connect the points, okay? So instead of having a good time, I'm now having a bad time. So now, when I'm on my run, I look at the sky, and 10 minutes ago, it gave me all this joy. So we have the point, the external point, the sky, and then we have the internal point, appreciation. That's what was going on, because that's how the external was integrated with the internal. Now, there's a new element. There's Jerry, who I don't like. So because Jerry has infected my integration, that same external point, the sky, is now released from the bar that connects it to appreciation and connects it to anger and bitterness. So now that same sky that had inspired beauty is now inspiring anger and bitterness. Why? Because I saw Jerry and everything messed up my integration. So the reason why it's a 4D sphere is you can very clearly see that it's being rendered transparent, which is to say it's not just space, but it's also space's connection to internal time, time as an intensity. There is every time something spatial happens, there is a corresponding generation, a corresponding effect in terms of time as an intensity. And the reason why it's a sphere is because it closes off, right? So things like memory, right? That's what was activated when I saw Jerry in this example. Memory, emotions. It's not that they continue to just move themselves further and further on this flat plane where they can never be connected. No, if they did that, then there'd be no connection at all. I'd have no intense reaction or internal reaction to Jerry at all because there'd be no connection. It's a sphere, so everything closes in on itself, right? So this transparent sphere integrates and renders transparent, essentially. The 4D sphere is what makes it so all aspects of your internal state are affected or invoked, or integrated, I should say, with the external world. So that should be, hopefully, a decent enough explanation of the 4D sphere. And the reason why it's moving is because we're always moving, right? Even if you're standing still, something is moving internally. So yeah, hopefully that was decent enough. If you want, if I didn't explain it, just let me know in the comments, and I'll try to do a little quick video. But the point is, everything is connected, everything is integrated. So this 4D sphere is filled, it is constituted by meaning and connection. Go look at that visual that I left in the description. It's very important. Don't get yourself beat up if you don't understand this concept right away. It can be very, very, very frustrating sometimes. So don't beat yourself up. You're learning a new thing. Like, this is a completely new way of seeing the world. in the context of you being a rationalist your entire life. It's not easy to just get rid of these things, so don't beat yourself up. Okay, so now we'll continue. One aspect remains to be clarified before we turn to this striking adaptation, excuse me. Any adaptation, indeed, every realization of a fourth dimension, this is important, can be a world constituent only if it is not considered as merely incremental, but as an integrating dimension. We are not doing spatial, or I should say, we're not exclusively just doing spatial enrichment. Okay? That's not what we're doing. That's part of it. What we are doing is we are integrating. Very, very, very important. I would actually argue that the spatial enrichment aspect is actually the greatest barrier to integral consciousness, because all you're really doing, and it is good, it's better than rationalism, it's you're spatially integrating the magic, mythical, mental, and now integral structures. That is good, but you need to fuel these and integrate them by time as an intensity. And once you do that, you get out of here, back in here. If it is considered, in other words, merely as an incremental dimension and utilized as such, the result is merely a further expansion of space, which can and would have a world-destructive effect. There are already initial and extremely tangible examples of the effects of an incompletely realized fourth dimension, as in the negative manifestation of atomic fission. For this reason, we emphasize that the fourth dimension of the aperspectival world must serve consciousness as an integral function, as systasis. Only then will it be a world constituent. If it serves, on the other hand, as a merely incremental and expansive quantity, it will destroy not just the mental rational structure, but also the genuine form of the incipient integral structure. Beautifully said. Having dealt with this basic reservation, we can now examine the various forms in which the concept of a fourth dimension has been adapted by representatives of the various disciplines. So that's another thing. We're going to see how people from various disciplines, that's kind of Gebser's whole thing. The space was discovered and space was utilized through various disciplines, not only geometry and math, but also science, but also just exploring with Columbus, with art and architecture, all this stuff. Well, the same thing's going to be happening with time. Let's see. Here we shall not employ a chronological approach, but rather a different schema of organization, that of the four structures of consciousness. Surprisingly, it will be seen that the individual representatives of the various disciplines adapt the fourth dimension in accord with the consciousness structure predominating in the particular discipline, a circumstance which could lead us to question in each given instance the integrative capacity of the concept. Ooh, interesting. So essentially, if you have a discipline that's lost in the magic structure, guess what? They're going to interpret the fourth dimension in the magic structure. If you have a discipline that's lost in the three-dimensional rational sphere, like we're about to see with Einstein, guess what? You're going to run into a problem. You're going to interpret the fourth dimension through three-dimensionality, and it's going to be better, but not great. Can the underlying basis of a form of manifestation be treated or evaluated as a mere part of this form? Actually, I shouldn't have read that. Okay. The concept of a fourth dimension unmistakably expresses the new task of overcoming the previous one-sided spatial fixity of consciousness. But such a supersession is accomplished only by integration, not by destruction. The introduction of time, the divider, so that's 3D mental time, we've covered this, the introduction of time, the divider, as a fourth dimension destroys space and time, and the introduction of temporicity as a fourth dimension is tantamount to assigning an incongruent dimension to space, inasmuch as temporicity can only function within the two-dimensional structure, and it is rationalistic nonsense to propose timelessness as the fourth dimension, since the timeless has its reality only in the one-dimensional structure. Hopefully this should make sense. I'm not going to explain it too much. We're 40 parts into this goddamn series, so if for whatever reason you need a refresh, go watch those time videos again. The adaptation of the concept of the fourth dimension in certain circles to denote nothing more than manifestations of the extrasensory is a magic adaptation. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to start with magic structure adaptations of the fourth dimension, which is going to talk about here. Then with Mach and some others, we're going to get into the mythical. Then with Einstein, we're going to get into the mental. So right now, we're in the magic structures. You need to, when you hear the words I'm about to read, there should be certain words that immediately give away unity, timelessness. These things should immediately give away. If I gave you a quiz on Gebser, you should be like, unity and timelessness, what structure does that belong to? You should know that immediately. So just think about these things. So now what we're seeing with magic is the extrasensory is the fourth dimension. This is wrong, but this is the magical structure's interpretation of the fourth dimension. Such manifestations are more appropriately characterized as those which such groups define as, this is a weird word, extrasensory. E-X-T-R-A, extra, S-E-R.S-O-R-Y, and believed to be attainable via mediums. If we dismiss such pseudoscientific trickery, it is not because we doubt the manifestations themselves. While materialists distrust them because they seem too lacking in matter, we recognize them as being all too materialistic, indeed crypto-materialistic. The compulsion to materialize such vital and psychic splinters in various forms, to which are then ascribed metaphysical, meaning lying behind the physical, valuations, when at best these manifestations should be deemed hypophysical, which is lying underneath the physical. So rather than being above the physical, it's lying underneath. Merely demonstrates that all such occultists are in a certain sense crypto-materialists. There you go. The fact that this fourth dimension manifests itself only in the state of trance as the result of the subject's re-immersion into the magic egoless unconsciousness indicates that the stimulation of a lower consciousness structure is irrelevant and has at the best status of a curiosity for the present-day consciousness. So what he's saying is that all these occultists, when they try to materialize these apparitions or these extrasensory, immaterial spiritual phenomena, they're essentially just rationalists. Think about what you're doing, all right? Like, sometimes you can't illuminate what is meant to be darkened, and that's what they're doing. So normally, you would say that, these guys are anything but rationalists because they're lost. They're extrasensory, so they're above, at least in theory, space. But in reality, what they do is they take all this stuff and they try to materialize it. So they essentially just become this unholy mix of deficient magical and mental structure stuff. It's cool that he calls out pseudoscience too. I think it's important because, obviously, I think most people on my channel found me because of the anti-rationalism, and that is obviously a great part, and that is a part of it. But that should never be, conflated with the idea that you just toss this stuff out entirely. That's ridiculous. The patent senselessness and worthlessness of the phenomena produced by such spiritistic and mediumistic means is clear evidence of their origin in the web of magic enmeshment, characterized by its fortuitousness and lack of directness. There are other indications that manifestations produced in this manner from the inferior supersensory should not be considered as manifest fourth-dimensional phenomena. These would include the evident interplay of unilaterally activated vital currents, magnetism, and the merging of the individual with the deficient, re-established clan, as in the forming of unity. Of the participants in such gatherings where they sit in a circle and clasp hands. These things merely involve the reinvigoration of the forgotten power of timelessness, which becomes deficient because the phenomena that become acute from its capabilities overpower those who have unnaturally invoked them. So essentially what he's saying, with all these ridiculous mediumistic and spiritualistic seances, all you're doing at best is activating a deficient magical structure because you just opened the door. You put the walls down in the dam, and now the water's coming in. It's going to overflow you. Don't do this. Stupid. You go forward. The fourth dimension, as defined by Friedrich Zollner in his work cited above, 342. Let's go back a little bit and remind ourselves. Okay, 342. Let's talk about Zollner. At the hands of the materialist psychist, however, the fourth dimension took on a predominantly psychic character. They incorporated it into their cloudy field of inquiry as the occult component of nature, and attempted to clarify in a spiritistic manner the partially hidden, partially manifest substructure of nature. So, Zollner seems to be thinking that the fourth dimension is a spiritual, immeasurable, invisible substratum in which the sensory aspects of the world are but its polar complement. In his ideological wake followed all of those circles who were prompted from a mediumistic and materialistic standpoint to describe the supersensory as the fourth dimension, whenever it made an appearance at their spiritistic seances. So his understanding of the fourth dimension is, again, filtered through the magic structure, so you're seeing all this magical stuff, almost quite literally. So any extrasensory, supersensory, spiritual, magical stuff, I guess, is the fourth dimension, apparently. Okay. So the fourth dimension, as defined by Zollner in his work cited above, is nothing more than the deficient timelessness which, when reinvigorated by mediumistic persons, is visible to rational man because the effectual modes of this state are manifest in an amply materialistic form in three-dimensional space. The purely spiritistic nature of Zollner's attempts underscores the accuracy of our estimation. He may well serve as an example of the magic adaptation of the fourth dimension, since he is apparently the first to apply this concept to magic phenomena. And the concept is still misused today by his numerous successors in spiritistic circles. So, if I have any Zollner fans in the audience, unfortunately, you've been owned. Young Stilling and Justinus Kerner, whose magical experiments preceded Zollner's, were content to explain the results as odd theories, that's OD-theories. Life magnetism, somnambulism, and the like. Zollner adopted a concept that was correct as such, but applied it to an area inadequate to the concept. Even his clever scientific reference to Gauss, Riemann, and Fechner is not sufficient to disguise this. He defines the fourth dimension as a, quote, complex spatial coordinate of an imaginary character that leads to an expanded view of space. So we're going to talk about that for a second. He defines the fourth dimension, which is invisible, as a complex spatial coordinate. So not only are we filtering it through the magic structure, we're now going back to almost space, where space is the only thing. There's no reference to time here. A complex spatial coordinate of an imaginary character, so it's almost as if it is a non-spatial, spatialized thing, I guess, that leads to an expanded view of space. Hello, spatial incrementation. That is not the only thing. I'm sorry. You have to integrate the things with time as an intensity. It is symptomatic that the misrepresentation and misdefinition of the fourth dimension immediately elicits the erroneous conclusion that it must be space expanding. Zollner already held to this definition in the preface of his Principles of an Electrodynamic Theory of Matter. This is the great thing. Gebser knows this science stuff, so he can just be like, yeah, you appealing to Gauss and Riemann, I've read them, and you did a terrible job, so try something else. To bolster the plausibility of an imaginary expression, evidenced by his definition of a fourth dimension, he claims the support of Gauss's exposition of the validity of algebraically imaginary quantities. And finally, he adduces the remarks of G.T.H. Fechner, who, in his treatise The Attitude of Day versus the Attitude of Night, which spoke of the incontestability of Zollner's spiritistic experiments. As a consequence of his interweaving of incongruent structures, and that's what he's doing. So on one hand, you're filtering everything through a magic structure, and at the same time, you're saying that this leads to a complex spatial coordinate that is expanded view of space. These are two completely separate structures that you have not adequately, separated or reconciled or integrated. That's probably the better word. So no. Zollner goes on to posit the phenomena evidenced by his spiritistic seances, the spatial emergence of the extrasensory as the expression of the fourth dimension. It has, unfortunately, been necessary to explore this somewhat treacherous realm of the misinterpretations of fourth dimensionality, since these misconstructions are still practiced today, and when employed irresponsibly, can lead to irresponsible conclusions and false teachings. When someone tries to tell you that the fourth dimension has a spiritual component to it, if they tell you that this comes at the expense of 3D rationality, or it means that you have to revert back to this unity, remember sitting, clasping hands, we're all unified, and we're doing seances and mediums, you know that is magic structure nonsense. That is not going forward. That is going backwards. So anytime you hear someone say this, throw them out. They are not serious. They are not serious. They are not Gebser. They are not serious. Don't listen to them. It hasn't, okay. The element of irresponsibility is inherent in these actions and interpretations because they are the result of practices in which the participants, particularly the medium, are in a condition where the responsible ego consciousness is not only muted but essentially suppressed. So essentially what you do when you deficiently activate exclusively the magic structure, you've essentially forfeited all the benefits of the other structures. And with the mental structure and the ego, you can't rationally restrain yourself, so you might as well just jump off a cliff. The interpretation and adaptation, on the other hand, which is bestowed upon the fourth dimension by modern mystics, is mythical and as such is equally inadequate. So we're not just doing magical, we're not just doing mythical. That's dumb. Here we encounter the greatest possible variety. Adherents of certain idealistic philosophies, psychophysicists, neo-mystics, and the majority of traditionalists. These representatives of a deficient mythical interpretation can all be considered as quote-unquote psychist, a concept we have defined in part 1 of this work. So essentially someone who cannot get out of their psyche. In the same way that rationalists can't get out of space, they are confined to their psyche. They just can't. Literally everything becomes just a psychological phenomenon. It's kind of, I hate to say this, but it's kind of young at his worst. I hate to say, he's a brilliant man, don't get me wrong. And that dude, you could have his intelligence. It would trump mine, but there's more to the world than just psychologizing everything. Their exclusive attachment to a mostly unconscious disporting in the psychic realm gives all of their statements a certain ill-defined and uncompelling quality which is inherent in the mythical structure. Psychists are to the mythical realm what the spiritists are to the magic. The concept of spiritism derives, in fact, from spirits and has little to do with spirit. We've discussed this in the section covering soul and spirit. Not to mention the spiritual, as the mutilating psychism has ultimately to do with the soul. It was Ernest Mach, as we have seen, page 342. Let's go back. All right, let's talk about Mach real quick. As early as 1864-65, in a series of lectures on psychophysics held during the winter of that year at the University of Graz, Ernest Mach had propounded the notion of a spatial conception augmented by an additional dimension, and suggested it as an explanation of previously inexplicable physical phenomena. So this is much better. It's not great, but it's much better. So think about what he says. Has propounded the notion of a spatial conception augmented by an additional dimension. That's really what we're doing with the fourth dimension. Okay. Who first applied the concept of the fourth dimension toward an explanation of certain processes of the psyche. Did I even... let me finish up that Mach prayer. I don't know why I stopped. Whereas Einstein's conception of a fourth dimension is purely epistemological and physical geometrical, Mach's conception has a distinctly psychophysical coloration, despite his positivist and phenomenological viewpoint, his so-called empirio-criticism. So let me go back. So Mach first applied the concept of the fourth dimension toward an explanation of certain processes of the psyche. Despite the integrity of his work and research, he represents the initial example of a psychistic interpretation of the fourth dimension. So he clearly likes Mach. He says he's got integrity. He just came to the wrong conclusion. His epistemological reflections can still be discerned in Einstein's theory of relativity. Yet alongside his philosophical investigations, where he vigorously maintained a positivistic phenomenological viewpoint, he was involved in acoustics, a purely magic realm. In particular, he propounded the view that knowledge was simply based on experience. In this, he became a conqueror of mechanistic materialism and allowed, perhaps unconsciously, the primacy to pass from materialism to the energistic and psychic principle, which dwells in both experience and work, to which he had devoted one of his first publications. So in many ways, it seems as if he's transcending... it seems as if he's meeting the new task, which, as he explained earlier, was to transcend the spatial perspectivity that has been conferred as exclusive validity. An exclusive validity has been conferred onto an exclusive 3D spatial way of doing things, the perspectival fixity. So it seems like he's done this because he's gotten out of the purely physical realm and now he's into energy and work. Unfortunately, he goes backwards. The norm of his conception is furnished by the autonomy of all energistic events whose fundamental pattern is given in psychic temporicity. Strictly speaking, such energetics, of course, when we say temporicity, that's the 2D, midday, midnight, the seasons cycling, the polar complementarity. It is that mythical cycle of occurrences which circles from pole to pole, from negative to positive and back again, that provides psychic and physical phenomena with their rhythmic regularity. So, like you just said, pole to pole. That should be a dead giveaway that we have not transcended, but we've gone backwards into the mythical structure. Since work is a movable asset while possessions are immobile assets, Mack transcends in his psychistic way the exclusive valuation placed on fixed, static, three-dimensional spatiality. So in many ways, like I just said, that's a good thing. But these energistics of temporicity, which form in fact the basis of two-dimensionality, cannot be the fourth dimension. They are rather merely the reinvigorated potencies of the mythical structure. It is of particular interest here that the conception of and emphasis on work was already instituted by Hegel in his phenomenology of the spirit, since it links the fourth-dimensional concept with the evident emergence of a new mutation during the French Revolution. It was the awakening of the left, which was responsible for instituting a dynamic and energetic concept of work and displacing the spatial, physical, or bodily conception of possessions. This shift of emphasis of the sociological foundations reflects the eruption of time, whereas in Mack's interpretation, it is evident that time is misconstrued to be a limited psychophysical form of time. So you can tell the differences between Gebser and Mack by their interpretations of the French Revolution. As Gebser noted earlier in the series, the French Revolution really was the eruption of time. Why? Well, one, we started to see the machines also come about at that time, and the machines that we've created incorporate time, if you will, in a spatial sense. So how can we conquer space in less time? That's good. It's okay, but it's not everything. And it's also time in terms of psychological and social, because the time as an intensity experienced by those subjugated by the French Parliament became so intense that they had no choice, or they felt compelled, I should say, to erupt and destroy all the previous ordered, hierarchical, rational, 3D way of doing things. So the monarchy went to go. Obviously, the king got his head chopped off. Marie Antoinette got her head chopped off. We completely destroyed the old order. With the neo-mystics, we are faced with a different situation. The flight from space that dominates their attitude causes them to seek and find a spaceless realm, which is nonetheless not necessarily inanimate. In this, they approach by retrogression the mythical consciousness structure whose character, as we have indicated, is spacelessness. The superficiality, i.e. surfaceness, sustained by the circle-closing polarity. The equally characteristic and extensive identification of soul and life in the mythological sphere all too easily misleads the mystics into the feeling that this life of correspondence to the stars and the tides, into whose flux they immerse themselves, is universal life in a corresponding universal soul. Their rejection of the mental three-dimensional outer world for a two-dimensional one of contemplation and inner vision is a further temptation to view such subscendence, of the three-dimensional as, in fact, a transcendence. And whenever they describe the forgotten yet rediscovered and reinvigorated state of peaceful, submissive suspension in mental terms as a dimensional increment rather than a loss, they fancy this unrealized retrogression into the mythical structure to be the fourth dimension. So again, because we've gone back to the non-spatial aspect, it tricks people into thinking that you've transcended to real 4D. But in reality, what you've done, you've just regressed back to the non-spatiality of the mythical structure. And you can tell because there's all these correspondences and polar complementarities. So I think what Gebser is saying here, don't mistake the psychological contentment that is conferred by living in the mythical structure as a transcendence. We've already done this. You have rejected the three-dimensional spatial world. Again, he mentioned this at the beginning of this video. We integrate. We do not negate. It's very important. So if you're ever lost, and I'm not saying it's wrong to get in the mythical structure ever. You just can't stay there because we've already done this. A prime representative of this attitude and misinterpretation of the fourth dimension is the highly respected Maurice Maeterlinck. His book, The Fourth Dimension, which begins with a short critique of the main attempts by mathematics and physics to reach a solution, is devoted to an exhaustive consideration of attempts made by men outside the scientific sphere. As the fourth dimension, Maeterlinck proposes eternity, perpetual and all-encompassing simultaneity, and infinity. Ultimately, it is the great unknown, or God, so it's this sort of mystic, almost similar to magic in a way. Maeterlinck also takes into account the ether, to the extent that it is too is an unknown, and thus comes closer to the conceptions held by certain traditionalists, such as Raoul Auclair mentioned earlier. For Auclair, ether is the basic substance of all matter, the original element of creation to which, as a fourth element, and simultaneously as a first, all manifestations return. For him, time is the fourth terminus, but not the fourth dimension of three-dimensional space. The cyclic interpretation employed here demonstrates the degree to which he is committed to temporicity, to the point of ultimately confusing it with the fourth dimension. So another example of that mythical conflation with four-dimensional time is Maeterlinck. So I'm not saying he's not a bright guy, but he is wrong. A particularly strange and somewhat perilous interpretation of the fourth dimension can be found in the writings of the pseudo-esoteric P.D. Ouspensky. His interpretation goes so far as to accommodate the temporal dimension to the three spatial dimensions by a form of trisection, in such a way as to create a six-dimensional construct wherein the three temporal divisions are then past, present, and future. This quantification, subdivision, and blatant spatialization of time, already envisaged by Hegel, is surely the most bizarre form of mythical mental deficiency. It is further confused by its emphasis on ecstasy and the author's devotion to the magical attitude of his shaman-like teacher George Gurdjieff, master of the school of the Fontainebleau. Fontainebleau? God, I despise the French. You gave Manchester City Samir Nasri. Who else? Yeah, that's about it. I like Nasri, even though he's a bit of a bit of a dick. Its Eastern lack of conformity to Western modes of thought endows it with a certain shimmering and psychic multifacetedness, that is not without its attractions for disoriented truth seekers. So I love when Gebser rips on people. It's some pretty funny stuff. We're going to stop there. We're going to pick up next time, of course. Take a guess who we have next. Next, we have Einstein. So what we've done in this video, we've done a history of the application of the fourth dimension, but we've also done it through the magic and mythical way of doing things. So next week, we're going to be picking up with Einstein, and we're going to see how the mental way, though better than the preceding ones we talked about, is still, unfortunately, fails. We're going to talk about what the negative effects of incorporating time, that is 3D mental time, that is the time of the clock and time of the calendar, with space. Think about what potential possible problems that could go. Essentially, what you've done is you've incorporated space with space. The homework quiz for you guys this week is to think about potential negative outcomes of that integration, if you want to call it that. I love you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We're getting into some heavy stuff here, so we're going to be continuing next week. This is going to take... How many more videos for this section? Yeah, probably one more video for the fourth dimension, then we'll get into temporic. So, love you guys. You guys are the best. And I'll see you soon. Thank you guys so much. You guys are the best. I love you.